Hey guys, it's Joe and Mike again. I just wanted to check in at our, we wanted to do it at 2,500 miles. We got a couple of extra miles here, 2662 on the odometer. Pretty close on both of these sleds. We just got this guy cleaned up, all the maintenance done. Wanted to go ahead and take a step back and kind of walk through and do a full comprehensive maintenance guide for the VR1. We're gonna start on the front of the sled, work our way to both the side panels up underneath the hood, and make it all the way to the back eventually. All right, well, the first thing we're gonna do is begin at the very, very front of the sled, have a look at the skegs, the skis, and some of the front steering components. In order to do that, to change out your skegs or your carbides, you're gonna need a 1/2-inch socket on a 3/8-inch drive. You can also put it on an impact wrench. Some potential tools, you can have a jack if you'd like to have, or you can use the tipping method. That's why I have it kind of as an optional. And you may want to have a set of gloves. Things to look out for, obviously are going to be your ski wear, some additional bushing wear. We cover that here in a video in a minute. Take a look at your tie rods and your tie rod jam nuts to make sure that they are still hooked up. Look out for any A-arm dings, or where things may have gotten bumped or bent around. And really, this only takes about 20 minutes. It's pretty easy, and at the end of this short clip, we'll show what they look like. Okay, guys, we're starting at the front, as I said, and there's just a couple of tools that we need, and I wish I could give you 100% the torque specs, but ultimately we'll need a small jack here that we can get the front end off the ground. And ultimately, for our setup, we need a couple of extra tools. But generally speaking, you need this 1/2-inch drive, and away you go. You can also do it with obviously with an impact wrench, you can go faster. And the torque specs on this are just make it tight, because the nuts on this kit, it comes as a Woody's kit, Trailblazer. You can see the number on it there. They are nylon nuts, so they won't back out, so you don't have to worry about it. But ultimately, we're gonna go ahead and jack up the front end of the sled here, and we'll catch a video in a second of Mike going through the 3 bolts. I did mention we have one extra step. On the front of our sleds, we have what's that ski navigator that we mentioned before. And with that ski navigator, we'll have to remove that out of the way first, then get after the 3 nuts that are on these skegs. We'll pull them out, take a look at them, and see how we did here with another 1,600 miles or so on the sled versus where we were at before. Many of you guys commented on our prior video with your level of disgust on our skegs and where they ended up, and had a lot of good insight on suggestions moving forward. We'll see how these guys held up here on this last 1,500 miles. All right, Mike got a head start. He's on all 3 of his over there. This is a little bit of a challenge. I was getting this GoPro camera set up. Now that we have it set up and Mike is cranking away by hand, I'm gonna grab a nice little impact over here and get the job done a little faster. All right, guys, just doing a quick comparison here. We were ridiculed, as I said, pretty hard about our skeg treatment last time. So here are mine. This is Joe, of course, and you can see there's still a little bit of carbide after 1,500 miles on these guys here. Obviously comparing that against what is brand new, and we had to figure out why, but Mike's getting a little aggressive with his skegs, and you can see down here that the carbide is gone on a big portion of it. Another piece of carbide is breaking off. Yeah, the runner is still here. It's not getting into the ski. There's still some pieces of carbide on this, but his are getting beaten down a little bit more. It might be as simple as, crossing the street to make sure that we're wearing down, equally or evenly on both sides. But wanted to give you guys a comparison. One, not bad. Actually could ride it a little bit longer if we wanted. There's still carbide. The other, obviously, is time to go. On the reassembly side, you pop the skeg right back up through, and there are washers that come along with it that are on from factory or from stock. Woody's doesn't come with new washers. We've been reusing the same washers. I've done it time and time again. I never even think twice about it. Some people have mentioned you don't need the washers, but why not have the extra added level or layer of protection? What's important here is once you get the skeg in, feed all the nuts on by hand. Once you get those on hand tight, you're gonna go ahead and tighten them down. I actually like to hit the center one first, make sure that the skeg seats fully underneath. Take a look. then tighten down the other two. And then for us, after we get those tightened, we'll go ahead and move forward with getting our navigator back into place. It's rather simple, and once you get this thing tightened up, even if you use an impact wrench, I think it's important to afterwards put a regular wrench on it and feel by hand how tight it is. I don't have anything on torque specs on this necessarily. Ultimately, it is tight, and get it kind of beyond a little bit more than snug. I would say, I don't know, I would put it about 40% tightness. And then ultimately, like I said, you don't have to worry that much because there are nylon nuts that are on the back of this. All right, Mike's just finishing up here. He's just getting that navigator back in place. And once you get them in, it's a good idea to take a look to make sure that the skeg is lined up, straight, looking good, not catawampus, not any gaps in it whatsoever. But that really is step one. We started at the very far in front of the sled. We've got our skegs done. They're good to go. One thing I've been doing more recently on these Polarises, and it was a small issue that we noticed with the axis, and I'm starting to see it a little bit with the Matryx. And right now it's kind of a monitor and see type of ordeal, where these front bushings between this and this bushing here, they get a little bit of wear in them. And so you can see that wear that's, see if I can hold this still enough to see. You can see, and all I'm doing is I got the tip of the ski in my hand, I'm wiggling it back and forth, and I'm pushing on it a little bit, and I'm getting that whole ski and move back and forth. Now I do remember this from the days of the Axis. This is what I would call somewhat normal. It's a very typical, and actually it's a little bit scary how much that the front of it moves. You can see that. What we're gonna do is monitor that. Obviously monitor it closely. Let the dealer know, and I'm willing to bet that this one is, well, this one might not be facing the same thing. See, this one actually is, oh, nope, it's there. It's got the same wobble to it. You can move that back and forth. So we're gonna watch these bushings along the way. They should be fine, but we're gonna let the dealer know, and then obviously monitor them every time we change the skeg. All right, gentlemen, I want to move on to kind of step, or chapter 2, if you will, which is going to be the clutch and the PTO side. We'll begin here by taking off the side panel to get in to take a look at the belt. And the clutch, obviously, is the same panel you go in to refill your oil. You can see the tools here, and I go over those tools again at the end of this section. And there's an optional step that we do along the way, which is we go ahead and utilize an air compressor. And we try to do this, honestly, after every ride. Some of those rides are more or less about 1,500 miles. If you're doing 500 miles and it's over a week or two and you're back home, you want to go ahead and see if you can't get this blown out. And you'll see some of the orange dust coming out of this area. It's actually quite a bit that comes out of there. I fast forwarded. I think everyone understands or gets the point of obviously of using an air compressor to blow this out. But this is a trick that we learned years ago. It definitely helps out with longevity. And one thing I fast forwarded through there quickly was to make sure that we are ultimately turning your key to the off position and the kill switch to the off position, so you don't obviously go ahead and accidentally start the clutch when you're kicking that PTO over forward. All right, guys, I hope you enjoy this section. Great little video of this is that shivs are all lined up nice. You come down and take a look at this, you can start to see some chatter and etching along the side. You can also see in here that it's getting a little bit, but all along this, she's gonna blow. She's gonna blow. Okay, guys, after we get started with the front, and we're gonna go ahead and go over to what is known as the PTO or the clutch side. And I was sitting with Mike, and he mentioned how nicely it looks that belt is riding in the pulley. And we're gonna go ahead and do a true Polaris measurement to see if it is indeed riding in the right place. As mentioned, you want to go ahead and blow all this area out. The next thing you want to do I'm going to light momentarily, is to come in and pull any of the debris out from the inside of the front sheave, as well as the back sheave. And then you want to check for your adjustment on this. Now, as I mentioned, Mike said that this is looking good, and we're going to take the challenge and see versus the spec of Polaris if it is indeed good where it needs to be for this belt. Also, this is a bit of a challenge that Mike and I are taking on this next trip, is that this belt, normally we would yank this belt at 2,600 miles. It hasn't broken, nothing bad has happened, but you can see if we look in close, it's starting to get the telltale signs of wear along the belt. You can almost see the cord coming through there, and it's starting to get what looks almost like a little bit of dry rotting. You can see a couple little marks down there. We're gonna clean it up and kind of take the challenge to see if we can make it another 1,500 miles or so on this belt. We've got a backup belt sitting there. We'll go ahead and see if we can't get it done. May get through the next ride, we may not. Okay, so on checking your belt tension, a lot of guys just like to come in and look at this ridge and see how it's riding, have it just kind of at where the divot is sitting at the top of that ridge. And that's a pretty close estimate. If you did nothing else but get it there and see how it rode, you'd be in pretty good shape. What we need to do is to actually grab the belt and rotate the belt around that sheave to see if it still has a little bit of play. Now I might go ahead and grab that belt and just the belt from the top side of it and try to rotate the belt. There you go. And it should just barely have a little bit of snugness there. And Mike's kind of right. It does seem pretty good. We're able to get a little bit of rotation around it without getting the front and rear sheave moving at the same time. Now, what Polaris says to do is we have to put a straight edge across this point from here to here, and then we have to pull down on this belt. Ooh, look at that there. Pull down on the belt, and then take a measurement to see what the difference is from the top to the bottom. It says about 1 1/4 inch. We're gonna go ahead and take that measurement next. I think the hardest part was for Mike and I to actually go around the house and find a flat measuring device. So now, it looks like you need a couple of hands to do this, and could be right. And candidly, you might be able to lay that flat, Mike. Just lay the whole roller flat on top of there. And don't flex the roller is all, just flex the belt. And see if we can get the difference between the two of those by pulling the belt down now. Oh, this is a challenge. I don't know how you do this. You need to have more hands than this. Here's our flat edge. You know, what is it here? Is it 1 1/4? Is it 1 1/2? Is it, I mean, what are we talking? Are you pushing as hard as you can? Come on. This is one of the most complicated things I've seen. Candidly, it's pretty close, and this is why most people don't actually do their belt in this fashion. And I've seen, you know, even from the dealer, you can see here, this is so close to 1 1/4 to 1 1/2. This is why I've never seen a dealer pull a straight edge. What they do is they adjust it up, they grab a hold of the belt, they can see if they can get it just to move up around this shim, and it's a little bit tight today. In 2 hands, Mike was able to get it and still wobble around there. You can see it's still moving. And it's just tight enough where you have to give a little bit of wiggle, but you can wiggle that thing around there. You don't want it too loose, obviously, and obviously you don't want it too tight, but that feels pretty darn good. We're going to stick with that on this guy. If you did need to adjust it, there is a small little nut here. I'll go ahead and get the wrench size for that momentarily. And you back this out, and then you change the depth of this by screwing this inside here. You screw that inside, that separates the shivs and lets the belt drop down in more. If you loosen this inner one, then ultimately it tightens the shivs and pushes the belt higher on there.
I guess it's a 10.
Could be a 10, but I think it might be a 7/16 or a 3/8. It's an American size, which is weird. It's also an American on the inside of this. We did show you already that we did blow out the inside of this primary, and you can see there's still a lot more dust in here. I know that a number of guys recommend, or I've seen a number of forums where they will go ahead and blow this out with brake cleaner. We blew it out with compressed air. I think that's a good enough job for, you know, mid-season and through the season. At the end of the year, I have to do a very thorough cleaning on that with brake cleaner. But candidly, I don't like to put any fluid, any liquid in there. Obviously, don't put any lubricant on there throughout the year. It will hold together completely fine. You've blown out the majority of the dust. You're in pretty good shape. And then ultimately, at the end of the year, do a thorough cleaning and drying with brake cleaner. I'm just kind of doing the last part of the process, which is getting a little bit of Scotch-Brite or Scotch-Brite pad in there. You can shine it up the inside of that shiv, and down towards the bottom where the actual axle is on that is in the shaft is where you will find the great majority of the debris. You'll see some scoring that usually rides up the outside of that. Of course, this is much easier to do at the end of the year when you take it off in mid-season. Right now, you're just trying to get the majority off. If you see anything that's significant scoring, discoloration on that shiv, you might want to go ahead and investigate further. But like I said, for mid-season or 2,500 miles, halfway through the season, it's good enough just to get the majority of the debris off, and you'll be good to go. Kind of the tool set for the PTO side. Straight edge if you're going to use that method, and also a measuring device if you're going to use that method. I'm sure there's somebody got a comment there's an easier way to do it, but the way the dealer generally sets it up, I think, is pretty good, so you don't necessarily need these. Glove, Scotch-Brite pad, an 1/8 inch hex key or Allen wrench, and a 7/16 wrench, or you can even use a socket, but it's nice to have a wrench so when you retighten that nut, jam nut, that you can hold the inner Allen while you're tightening the jam nut.
On the battery side, we'll break this into two sections. The first section we're going to go through begins with an inspection and taking a look at the battery, the battery strap, and there's a plate, of course, a protection plate that goes over top of the battery. You want to make sure that that is still in place and folded over the ground side and not over the hot side of the battery. It's going to give that inspection. Check the back side of that as well to see if that strap has melted at all. It's actually a pretty good tip. You're going to take a look at the brake pads. You can see down in there with a camera. Usually use your phone camera to see how much your pads have worn down and how much pad life you have left. The rule is you want to have pad thickness as thick as the backing plate. I think you can probably go a little bit less than that, but that'll give you a good gauge to understand. And pay attention. I mean, in this section here, we have to remove the exhaust muffler, which can be complicated to get out and get back in. Really getting the springs back in place is one of the trickiest parts, as well as getting the muffler aligned. At the end of this section, we show you how to utilize a piece of twine or string, which really is the trick for one of those springs.
Okay, over onto the non-PTO or the exhaust side. First thing I like to do when I come in here is a couple of places that you can have issues. One is this top spring often is missing and not here. I don't know why that particular spring disappears from time to time easier. I've opened my hood or side cowling a couple of times to find that spring missing. So our exhaust springs are in place. Coming down through, you can take a look at where we're at for. And it is actually nice to use a phone to get in there, and you can see the thickness of your brake pads. If you still have brake pads left, and that's good, we still do here. And another thing to take a look at is this battery strap that sometimes has been known to come apart and break. On this side here, we are concerned with what we've lost, more or less. But what I also like to take a look for is to see if there's any scoring along that brake disc. It'll show you if you have a brake hanging up. And as I mentioned here, we're going to have to get behind, well, I didn't mention, we're going to have to get behind ultimately this exhaust pipe here, the exhaust can, because we need to get, I don't know if you can see it very well, there are a couple of nuts that we need to get to that are back behind here that are utilized for ultimately adjusting, you can't see them very well, but ultimately adjusting the chain case tension. They're not really easy to get to without removing the exhaust can, which is why we're going to remove it momentarily. And the other thing that we're going to do while we're on this side and being at 2,500 miles is we're going to go ahead through and bleed out the brakes. And I didn't mention it while we're here, but go ahead and check the coolant level. It's a pretty obvious thing. You can see where full is. Okay, guys, in order to yank this exhaust, there are 1, 2, 3, and around the back, a 4 spring that's in there. And they're all kind of tricky. And look, I grew up in the days of using needle nose pliers and a lot of swear words from my father. But there's a lot nicer tools. You can get these spring pullers. They exist in a number of different places. But it's a little T-handle, T-bar with a hook on the end. It's a kind of a crooked hook, if you will. It kind of limps off to the side. But Mike will go ahead and show right here. You can get underneath the spring. Rather easy, any one of them. Click there, simple pull, and it's out, and you've removed it, and you're not cursing, swearing, trying to find the spring. you know, this is the tool to have. And it does help too. You have some of these really difficult springs that are out around the back to get to. Mike can go ahead and take off this top one next. And he's interesting way he's gonna do it. He's gonna pull it off and leech it right down the center of it.
Maybe.
Potentially. So that's out as well. Tension's off the spring. That's really nice to have that long handle to get that hook out of there. There's another one that's down underneath he's gonna have to get to.
I'm gonna grab this one.
Here's this back one. Takes a little bit of a twist and a pull. And it's out of the way. And there's one more to go where the header pipe or the expansion chamber pipe meets the exhaust down underneath it. I'll let Mike find it.
Okay.
Got her made. Now, you have a couple of things to be wary of and to watch out for. You have an oxygen sensor here, and in between these two pipes, between your muffler or your can and your header pipe or your expansion chamber, there is a lead gasket or a metal gasket. You don't want to lose that gasket. And this muffler sits in here and it rides on a bit of a bracelet on the back. So I'll have Mike go ahead. We're not going to take off the oxygen sensor. We're just going to be super careful with setting this thing here back and off to the side. He's going to go ahead and wiggle back and forth. Wiggle. He's doing it maybe for the first time, which is good. And the whole exhaust is going to have to come up in the air from the bottom straight up. And so you have to pop it kind of up in the air and out of a hole. I'll show while Mike's doing that. There is a hole underneath here that rides in and resides in.
Get your hand behind that plastic. Oh, great.
Got a casualty already.
Yeah. That's why you get an aftermarket.
Well, there is something nice to be said about the aftermarket can. All right, in order to adjust this, and Mike still has the exhaust off to the side, you're gonna take the nut, that's the jam nut that's closest to the to the chain case, and you're gonna break that free. And it can be a little challenging. There's not a whole lot of room. There's far less room doing it with the exhaust in. I've even attempted to do this from time to time with the exhaust in and was able to manage to get it done, but it's just simpler most times just to take the exhaust back out. So you're gonna loosen up your jam nut as Mike is doing now. Once that jam nut is loose, you're gonna make sure it's loose by a couple of turns. Now what you're gonna do, at first they say you're gonna tighten this center nut, which is the adjustment nut, essentially clockwise, and you're supposed to do it by hand until you can get it as tight as you can by hand, then back it out a quarter turn. What I always find is that it's pretty jammed up to begin with. You need to do the first turn, the first quarter of a turn by the wrench to get it moving. A lot of times I'll even move it in with the wrench, a couple of quarter turns just to make sure that it's loose, then back it back out, then do it by hand. It could be just bound up where the adjustment bolt goes into it because of having some debris or some mess on it. Now, ultimately, once you get it going good,
Or a wrench.
use a wrench a little bit. And any wrench you put into it, you're gonna have to take back out and still do it by hand, but you're trying to make sure that it's actually loose in there. And eventually you can get a feel for it and actually do it by a wrench, but the manual says, obviously, to do it by hand until it's tight and then back it out a quarter of an inch. Or sorry, a quarter of a turn. Yeah, I think you're doing the right thing. Just kind of try to back it out by hand now. Now he's gonna move him by hand, which is good. Okay. And see if you can tighten it back in by hand.
Let me see if I can get a couple more.
Okay.
There we go. It's not great.
One thing we might try to do just to help with the hand side of it is just grab a socket so we can actually get on it and twist by hand.
You don't really realize how heavy this exhaust is until it sits on it for a while. That's about all I got by hand.
Once she's in by hand, then you're going to back it off a quarter turn.
Oh, get a little bit more.
Get a little more out of it. Good.
That's it. All right, quarter turn.
And now the important part is you're going to hold the main, you're going to get in there with your 15 millimeter to tighten up the jam nut. Do it by hand first, get as tight as you can get it. And you're going to hold the main adjustment bolt, if you will, hold it stationary. You'll notice that as you tighten up that jam nut, that the 14 millimeter adjustment bolt wants to rotate along with it. So you're going to kind of hold one and move the other, if you will. And often you have to take the wrench and flip it over back and forth because you only have enough to get, you know, an 1/8 or a 1/12 of a turn. And so you have to keep flipping the wrench back and forth on that jam nut. Mike actually got to do another time there, which was good. Pretty impressive. And you're going to get this thing, I'm going to say pretty darn tight. I've seen these come loose before where you think you have it tight. That's obviously not good. And it's going to be a little complicated to get a torque wrench in there. So I'm going to say get it, you know, as tight as you feel comfortably without slipping off the jam nut. Well, if you thought taking the exhaust out was fun, you know, putting it back in is it might be even more fun than taking it out. Obviously, what you want to do is get the exhaust to clear the plastic. Then you want to get the bottom in first. Don't worry about the top. We know that you have to line up that pipe. So get this in, clearing the battery, clearing the plastic, which Mike is working on now. And you have to be a little bit high. Coming in, looks like it should clear.
That battery piece will hang you up a little bit.
It does. One more piece of plastic. Okay, so now what you want to do is angle the top of the pipe back towards you and slightly, like it is right now. And you're going to get the bottom of that exhaust pipe settled in, and that looks like it just popped into place, which is good. Then you're going to wiggle it back and forth and then get the top of this to line up. Watch that, obviously watch this. There's one more tricky thing, which is behind this pipe, there's a shelf, a little ledge that needs to ride on this arm. And so Mike's I'm gonna take a look at it here. Mike's gonna need to kind of get it up in the air just a little bit and then push back on the arm and then down. And once he has that, this thing should go nicely into place.
Maybe.
It does take some finagling. There's a little bit of technique and a little bit of, you know, eventually sorting it out. Well, Mike's back in it again for the last spring. It's always the last one that seems to cause the most problems no matter what you're doing. And Mike is feathering it in there. And it is really tough. You can't see well back behind there. To get the long part of the far part done first and then bring the short part back next. And you do have to angle and pull and twist. And that's why this puller is really is clutch. We'll let Mike fight his way through it. And ridicule and judge him all along the way.
Sweet.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Well, even us pros struggle sometimes with this inner spring, and it is so complicated to get to down there. There's really no place to grab at it. But candidly, from experience in doing this in the past, you take a piece of rope and stick it around it.
Ground wire works as
Ground
well.
wire or a good enough piece of string, and then you pull on it backwards from this side, the engine side, and then just make sure that it buttons up on this side. That's the trick with that spring there. One of the many tricks for that spring there. Okay, going back and taking just a quick look again at the brake pads. Seeing real quick if I can get the video to see. Get in here to see how much of that is left. It's tough to do, obviously. I'm gonna put the light on here. So on the chain case adjustment, you need to have 14 millimeter, it's the jam nut, 13 millimeter, it's gonna be the adjustment nut. a spring puller, if you don't have a smaller can, you have the exhaust still in stock for them. And we found this 14 millimeter, which was nice to be able to rotate that screw. And as Mike found out, it's also nice to have a magnet from time to time, and or a piece of string, or he said also you could use a piece of ground wire as an example.
On this portion here, we're going to go ahead and have a look at the chain case oil change. Many of you have done this. It's not that complicated to do. We're really performing this after every ride, which for us is about 1,000 to 1,500 miles. Keeping that in really good shape. It's not very expensive to do for the oil. We have a little bit of a tip here you'll see on the on getting that bolt loose. And of course, doing the brake bleeding. I think the brake bleeding is often overlooked. It needs to be done anywhere between 2,000 and 2,500 miles. And you can see the fluid getting gray and breaking down inside your master cylinder. I need to go ahead and consider doing it. It does make a big difference for your brakes.
All right, we got two more things to accomplish, which is going to be changing the chain case oil, and then we want to go ahead and bleed through the brakes. So we'll get set up for that, and really bleeding the brakes while we're on this side. It's kind of simple. We're going to have to access our master cylinder or our brake reservoir here, and we'll get those tools together. And we also want to be able to access this nut here. I got a couple of specialized tools that are going to help with that. And for the chain case oil, we're going to be accessing this fill/drain bolt on the side. One of the interesting things you'll find with the chain case oil is there's a chain case bolt here, and inevitably it becomes really complicated to get out. And I believe it becomes complicated to get out because we put the darn thing in way too tight every time we change the oil. We're not putting it in to be He-Man tight, but inevitably you put 10 or 15 pounds on it and it's going to get wedged in there, where a lot of times you have to hit this with a, you can call it a hammer or a strike in order to get it to come loose. And putting it back in this time, we're going to be a little bit more cognizant of putting it at 5 foot-pounds, what the manual says. And then ultimately, hopefully this will keep us from getting stuck in the future. You can see Mike is twisting a little bit on this. We don't really want to break off that ratchet, so what we're going to do is get a small punch and a hammer to get it loosened up. All right, so we just got a small piece of metal. It's actually a kingpin out of an old truck. And tapping on the outside of that to try to get it to break free or get a little bit loose. And then we're gonna go ahead and try again. And if it doesn't work, we'll tap on it again. I have never been in a situation where I've needed to put heat on it. Really, I just don't push on it too hard. If it's not moving at that point in time, I'll take that pin on the outside of that bolt, hit it a little bit harder, get her to go. And then I'll come back in with the wrench. Again, and it is my opinion that this is, we kind of caused this ourselves. And there it is, it finally went. So she's good to go, she's gonna come out. And so this time we're gonna try to put in the appropriate torque, and we'll find out if it makes a big difference or not. Next part of this process, and there's two different ways you can change the oil for this system, is that you can take off your battery and open up your chain case, which I will do once a season at the end of the season. It's nice, there's a lot of extra debris that's in there. or you can do what they call, or we call, suck and a blow. Now, I don't know about you guys, what your preferred method is, but for us, we're in a bit of a rush. We're going to do a suck and then blow. If you have your friend around, you'll have to decide who does which task. For us, we switch it up back and forth. When you pull out that nut, as you notice, Mike put a bit of a rag there because it's going to, more often than not, bleed fluid out. And so right now it's bleeding and trying to prevent it from getting onto the floor. And we're going to move forward with what I found is a pretty nice suction device. It's a, and I'm actually showing it here. I'm sure that I bought it off of Amazon. It's a, a Flowmaster. And how this works is you pump this guy up, and that pump creates suction, and then you lead the hose right into it. Mike's going to go ahead and show us how it's done. What's great about this is you don't need to necessarily have two people to do it. You can do it with one person. You can shove the hose in. You can pump this up. It creates a suction. It's sucking. You can go ahead and manipulate the tube. One thing that Mike wanted to show us is here is the nut that comes out. It's a magnetic nut.
Don't be alarmed. You're gonna have some metal slivers off of that because all those teeth are punched out when they're made, so they're always gonna be peeling a little bit off. So you see that metal, don't even worry about it.
So you wipe her clean, you set her aside and get her ready. Obviously check the O-ring seal, which is important to note again because we're putting this in relatively tight, but it does have an O-ring on, so it's gonna seal up at a lower torque rating on that bolt. We've been, obviously, like everybody else, the majority of people, putting it in way too tight. All right, we're nice and clean. All right, Mike's gonna use our Flowmaster. See what the rest of it says. The Flowmaster RL works best under pressure. I kind of like that tag. High-speed oil change pump. That's what we got here. This is the 5-quart variety. For our friends overseas, that's 4.73 liters. So in it goes. You can get this in, and you do have to manipulate the tube a little bit.
If you try to go straight on, you're just gonna bottom out way too early. There's a kind of a side channel there. You just keep working it in.
And get it in until it bottoms out. And now with this device here, you can just grab a hold of her and just start pumping and get a pretty good suction going.
See it priming right through the line.
Starting to flow up the tube and make its way in. And
there it comes.
And you'll find the great part about creating a lot of suction is after you create the suction and it pulls all the fluid out and it starts to pull in the air bubbles, you can then go back and start to manipulate and twist around the tube to get every last drop back out of it. Now, you've tried in the past, there are syringe devices that you can utilize to also pull in the fluid through. But this one here we think is the easiest. It's money well spent. And we're also going to utilize this when it comes to evacuating other fluids, like when we go to the brake perch. So it's not just for this, you can use it for other things. Any of you have jet skis as well, Sea-Doos, you can utilize this for the oil change. If you have to evacuate any fluid out of anything, this is the way to go. All right, so the fluid on this one here is a Polaris SCL. For those of you that can read French, look at this side. For those of you that can read English, read this side. And I'm not so sure that, I don't know why they don't want Spanish-speaking people to ride these sleds, but regardless, you have your SCL here. And you have a small funnel that kind of fits down in here. Mike's just going to hold and balance that while he simultaneously pours in a little bit of the fluid. This funnel here requires it to take a little bit of a gulp and then the weight. Probably try to put in about 50 milliliters. And you can do quite a bit there, Mike. And ultimately, you're going to fill it up until it runs back out of the plug. And so when you're doing this method, you are going to make a little bit of a mess. By this point in time, you might want to start filling, stop, pull the funnel out of the way, have a look. Is it coming back out yet? And it's not yet, you can see. So we'll put a little bit more in still. And you do that a couple of times and then you have her made. Probably a good idea to see what we got there.
Yep.
And now we're producing. She's pouring back out. And it's fine to let that excess pour out while you get your wrench ready. Apparently your torque wrench, which we've never used on this before. And this plug you need to be really careful to thread in by hand. It's at a what I would say is a unique or interesting angle coming straight out. And I haven't stripped one before, but I've come fairly close on going back in. I'm not catching the right thread. So once you get her started in there, I'm gonna take her up and rip that plug to a whopping incredible 5 foot-pounds. And hopefully in the next 1,500 miles, that plug stays in there. And we succeed with the experiment, and then we find out if we can actually get it back out. There's part of me that believes that it's going to be, it'll come out easier, and there's another part of me that thinks that it might get stuck anyhow because of maybe it's two different metals, and as that thing heats up, that one kind of galds in there a little bit. So here we go, Mike showing us the appropriate technique of using an incredibly small torque wrench. Look at this little diminutive thing. It's pretty cute.
Yeah.
Measure twice.
Quarter drive.
Measure twice, cut once. And that's in foot pounds, not inch pounds. And here we go. It probably already buckled over. Oh, is that it? Oh, it buckled over a long time ago. You put that in there way too tight.
Put a little bit on there.
we still don't trust the concept of 5 foot-pounds. All right, well, there goes that experiment. We'll get them next time.
Dude, that thing is so loose. 60 inch pounds.
Great part about not being a professional is we don't have to really feel ashamed when we mess something up. And we stood up after that measurement, and Mike said, "Wouldn't you know it? It is in inch pounds." Now we've converted over from foot pounds to inch pounds, and we're good and tight after adjusting this wrench.
Yep.
Feels a little better too, I'm sure. Yeah, so real quick on the tools, you need a 6 millimeter on a 1/4 inch drive, a hammer, a metal bar or a punch for getting a stubborn bolt for knocking it loose, a torque wrench, and then an oil evacuation type of device. There are syringe devices. This is a pump device that we think works great. That, also a few paper towels, and SCL, which is the oil that is ultimately needed for the oil change. On the brace, you're going to need to have a T20 hooked up to a 1/4 inch drive to open up the master cylinder, a 3/8 inch wrench for using the bleeder valve, some high temp brake fluid, DOT 4.4, a way to catch the exhausted or the used brake fluid, and you can use a small evacuator or not on the master cylinder. That's kind of a not necessary, it's nice to have. So once again, we just use the evacuator to go ahead and pull out that fluid, and we did take it all the way down to the bottom. There's a small risk with that, is that you give yourself a little bit of air bubbles, but since we're gonna go ahead and bleed this through all the way anyhow. We're not real worried about that. So what Mike's doing is he's actually jacking up the front. The way that he has his purse is at an angle, and in order to be able to get more fluid in there and to be able to fill better on the back side of this, we figured we'd jack the front up to level this portion out. Okay, so now we're just gonna go ahead and put some fresh fluid. You're gonna fill this up ultimately till it won't take any more without spilling it on the plastics. And so here comes that nice high temp, really beautiful colored brake fluid, DOT4 on this fluid. And Mike's then gonna gently go ahead and squeeze those brakes and pump them up. Go ahead and get it ready. And then what he's gonna do is he's gonna hold pressure on the brake lever, constant pressure on the brake lever. He's gonna hold it right now, just gentle pressure on the brake lever. If he holds too tight, and it's really difficult to loosen this nut, but he has to hold a little bit of tension on it. What's gonna happen is I'm gonna break this nut loose here. And as I break it loose, first one's always a little bit more difficult to get her to go. She's broken loose, and pull that pressure all the way to the bar. Now hold it to the bar, and I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this back up. This nut back here, sorry. And now that's broken loose, we can go back and forth and manipulate this pretty easily. I'm gonna make sure this tube stays on here better. See the tube trying to escape as I'm holding my phone. Okay, now Mike's gonna pump up the brakes again. You can see he's pumping the brakes. He's gonna hold constant pressure. And we're gonna go ahead and open this up again. You can see the fluid, the old fluid coming out. Once he gets to the bars, he'll tell me and hold it there.
There it is.
Okay, he's at the bars. I'm just cinching that up. He's gonna pump up again. Okay. And we're gonna do this until we get through all of the fluid that is inside of that cylinder.
There it is.
Okay, go ahead. Got it?
Mm-hmm. At the bore.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Should be good.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
All right. There.
All right.
There.
Now, really important as Mike's doing this is that he's topping off now a little bit as he goes. You don't want to get to the bottom of that reservoir. You don't want to introduce any new air into this. Okay, go ahead.
Yep.
You got her?
Yep. Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Lost our tube for a second. Tube going back on.
There it is.
Okay. Pump it up and tell me what it feels like.
Feels better. Feels tight.
Pretty tight.
Okay.
Do it one more time here.
Good.
Hang tight, don't do anything. I'm gonna go ahead and cinch this up now that we're on our last go. Make sure this is good and tight on this 3/8, and it is. And we'll take a look where we're at. We got nice clean fluid in there, nothing dirty whatsoever. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and clean up the top of this master cylinder with a little bit of rag, put it back together. So we are now topped off. We have the bleeder screw completely tight. All our little bit of dribbles of brake fluid have been cleaned up. And cleaned up on this side as well. And Mike's putting these screws back in. He's getting a couple of dribbles along the way. He's checking on those. Now, I can't stress enough this part is that these screws are screwing into plastic. And there is a rubber gasket underneath there. So you're gonna snug these screws up gently, but I wouldn't put any meaningful torque on them. You're just gonna tighten them up barely. You can always retighten them again on the trail if you were that nervous about it. Really what it comes down to is if your master cylinder is leaking, make it a little bit tighter. But you're going to be ultra cautious with these screws. You can strip them out relatively easy because it is a screw going into what it would appear to be, just plastic at the end of the day. One thing to note, did have happen one time to us on an Axis sled, is that we had a buddy that his brakes kept going to the bars. And that can happen because your brakes are not bled and you have some air in the system. But what had happened is this bolt was a little bit loose and he was losing fluid through here. We were able to ultimately get this tightened up, get enough fluid out of another sled just so he can use it, get up to town, and ultimately get some new brake fluid in there for him, and worked out kind of well.
In this section, we're going to go ahead and do some rear skid maintenance. We're going to take a look at obviously doing a bit of the adjustments to your track tension, taking a look at the bogey wheels, but more importantly, we're going to get in depth on how to replace your slides. One mistake that we made, and we didn't know it until we went into this, and hopefully it helps all of you, is we believed our slides by believing the side of the, there are a couple of wear bars or wear marks on the slides. We believed the wear bar on the side that indicated that it was time to replace the slides, and the reality is that we had still 50% of that slide left. We took some measurements of it here in the video to show how much of that slide you'll have left as well. So we're the sacrificial lambs on this. We're replacing our slides earlier than you'll need to, and we'll go ahead and show in this video, where those wear marks are along the way, so that you don't make the same mistake. All right, guys, thanks.
Okay, now we're going to go ahead and move on to the rear skid. In the rear skid for us, you can use a regular stand as we've been using that Mike's going to go and grab and bring over, and very often we use that same lift, but for us here today, since we know that we're going to go ahead and attack our slides as part of the maintenance, we're going to use our overhead. Here you can see we'll be able to grab this and pick it up in the air. As an overview, we're going to go ahead and pull our slides out of this. We're going to check our bogey wheels. We're going to go ahead and readjust and tension the track, put this all back together, and have us all nice and fresh mid-season, 2,600 miles ready to go on this rear skid. Okay, now that we got the sled in the air, what we have to do in order to fully pull out the slides and do a full inspection is we have to loosen this rear track. On each side, it's a 5/8" bolt. You have a 10 millimeter here. It's actually probably American crossover. We'll take a look at what that is in a second. And then ultimately, you'll loosen up this track. Once you loosen the track and you get some slack in here, we can go ahead to the front. I believe they're T27. I'll verify it. Nuts that hold in the slides. We'll go ahead and release those slides, get them knocked out of here, and then ultimately go ahead and inspect them. At this point in time, we're actually replacing them because they made it down to the wear bar, or close to the wear bar. And what we're gonna do is kind of measure and look at how much a new one has versus where we're at here, where it's pretty close to the wear bar. So when you hit the wear bar, you'll be well aware of how much you actually still have left. Also, once we get this thing up, I'm going to inspect all of our bogey wheels along the way. And you can see this one's got a little bit of looseness to it. That's wobbling a little bit. And what I found on my sled during its maintenance here was that this bogey wheel was loose enough that it caused the inner bearing to warp out a little bit. So I had to replace the bearing on this. Not because it was a bad bearing, but this being loose ended up causing that bearing to go bad. So we're gonna go ahead and check all these wheels here as we get them loose. You can see a great way to check the wheel is, is it still moving freely? How much play is it back and forth? It's gonna have a slight bit of play. A little bit of that can be addressed sometimes if that nut in the bolt combination is loose. Then obviously check the outside for broken plastic. What's interesting here, a lot of times you can see they get a little bit off center. That's normal to be a little bit off center. And if they look like they're starting to become quite wobbly, you need to get them off the sled. So check your plastic, check your rubber, check your play, make sure that it's moving freely, and ultimately make sure that they're tight. Front of this is a T 27, this time actually a T27. And you can get to this bolt. You can find it because there's a window here. And you have to come up underneath where my finger is and extract both of those two little bolts. Once you've extracted those bolts, and you can see how loose this track is, we then can contemplate all the ways to get this out. Effectively, it used to be where these slides were 100% flush and flat. Sometimes you would drill, put a screw in the side, sometimes you would use a screwdriver at an angle and beat it backwards. But with these little notches cut into the Indy VR1, and this was also on the Indy last year, it's really easy then to get in front of this and push this slide backwards as far as you possibly can. And once you get it pushed back, you'll actually grab through the back window here. You'll actually grab through the window with a pair of pliers and give it a small twist. And with that small twist, you'll be able to pull this straight on out. The other trick to doing it before you even get started is we're gonna go ahead and get some WD-40 down in between here. If this was fully dry, we would put some WD-40. Right now, we actually got quite a bit of moisture coming off from this ice melt. We're gonna try it with just the ice melt. If it doesn't work, we'll put a little bit of WD-40 in there. On these slides, and they generally wear this way, you know, somewhere along this back, you'll get somewhere. You'll get somewhere along the back, if you follow it. And it kind of locks in place. When you put on a new slide, it goes towards break-in, and it kind of shrinks quickly or rapidly to the wear bar. And then once it gets there, it kind of locks in and stops for quite some time. But maybe a little nervous and curious, and you can see the wear line is in the center of this thing, is that we finally were up to the wear line. We're just approaching it on this side. What I was curious about, not quite on this side yet, what I was curious about is how, and you can see it here as well, you'll follow the wear line down, and it's right there where the front curve of that would be. Really, that's where the place you need to be checking your slides. That's gonna be the most excessive wear, is where that first curve is coming from the front. So we're gonna go ahead and cut these in half and measure and see how much, or even at least visually take a look and see how much of that slide is still left. All right, now that they're loosened up, the track's loose, the slides are loose, the T27 bolts out of the front, you can see it's on the ground there. And ultimately, you can start to tap these things down. It's pretty easy to do. What you want to do is avoid having the screwdriver hit the side of the rail. It does scratch it up, but what I've discovered is interesting is that the rail is getting rubbed anyhow from where the natural slides were. So Mike's gonna go ahead and give this thing a couple of taps, keep going. Once it starts moving, it gets moving pretty good. You can see this thing is actually moving along really good. These, as I said, these Indies with the slots in the slides gives you a really nice place where you can get into and actually hit it and get this thing moving. And from the back side, you'll be able to see, so we'll start. And Mike's gonna hit it until he can't get it to go anymore. That's really the trick. So it's gonna come, it's gonna keep coming. Really nice, and it is into the window, and it should be bottoming out. You shouldn't be able to move it much more at this point in time. So now, Mike, if you'll come here real quick, what you're gonna do is you're gonna grab that with a pair of pliers, and you're gonna open those pliers up a little bit, those channel locks, and get it to where you can grab it good. And as you're pulling, you need to twist. That one there, you're gonna twist. Now grab it, there you go. If you can grab a hold of it that way. And sometimes you can move the track a little bit. You're gonna have to twist this semi-counterclockwise as you're pulling through. And if you get that little twist in it, then it'll come right to you. He's gonna twist, he's twisting, and he's pulling at the same time. You pull right towards him. A little more light on that. truck isn't there, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Behind her?
No, it's not there. I didn't hear anything loud. There we go.
You gotta pull towards yourself, and it's almost out. It's like giving birth to the slide. Come on, high fast. It's coming right now. Almost born. And I can see it's coming through. You don't have to cut your windows on this, unlike some other sleds where you have to cut your windows. I wouldn't rotate it anymore. Just keep it straight down and pull straight out. Woo. Good. Put yourself in the face with her. If you wanted to at this point in time, you could go back and beat it from the other side, but this, you should be able to pull her. She's not through there. Good. I got you. All right, I'm just gonna get a hand on her now and yank her right out of there. Here she goes. And she's out. We're gonna do the same thing with the other side. Well, doing things in terms of inches, I'm gonna take a quick look here. You can still see, even though you're at the wear bar, this guy is a 1/4 of an inch before it gets down to, well, that's interesting, before it gets down to ultimately your rear section where it's protecting. And here is a brand new one. And just to get an idea, maybe I could get this on here. You're looking at just underneath a 1/2 inch, ultimately, and you're really measuring from this point out, so about a 1/2 inch. So what's interesting to me is where the wear bar is, nobody knew this and nobody told us, is that the wear bar is where you've eroded half of this track or half of this high fax or slide away. So in my opinion, and we've pulled these and obviously we're changing them here, 2,500, 2,600 miles. And now that we've got them apart, we're definitely changing them. But you can go a little bit beyond that wear bar. That is your discretion on how far you're gonna go with that. And you can see from the side of this, there is another line that we weren't paying attention to that actually shows where the end of that plastic is going to be. So pay attention to this. That very, very top line here is where this plastic runs out. I'm going to show here the tip of this blade. This down here is the wear bar. Here's where you can actually, well, I wouldn't say you go to. You need to change these before you get to where the plastic runs out. So it's going to be somewhere between those two at your discretion. Going back on, we're going to use a little bit of WD-40. And what you're going to have to do is go back through, obviously go back through these windows. But be careful, you'll be tempted to go after the wrong cross. If you see that cross up top, you'll think that's where your slide needs to go. It needs to go on the one that's out of focus, that's on the bottom down there. So don't go after the wrong cross. I've seen that mistake made before. We see a little bit of plastic trimming. And we're gonna start to feed this thing through by hand. You go in a slight angle by hand, you twist it, you get it on there, you can force this thing by hand. Put a little bit of WD-40 on those sides before you get up there. And then we're gonna go ahead and tap it with a mallet. Lightly tap it with a mallet. It won't do much damage to it at all. Do it that way for many, many, many years. So you're gonna go into the window, he's gonna twist, he's gonna angle it down. He's gonna angle down further than he thinks he's gonna have to. He's gonna go up from the side, he's gonna take a look and see if it's starting to line up. Make sure you go after that bottom crossover. He's sliding it, look how easy that thing is going. It wants to go almost all the way home. What'll happen is he'll be able to push it pretty far until it hits this curve. So if he wants to keep on pushing It's nice to have a buddy to be able to push down this portion of it. You can tap it with a mallet. You can go get your screwdriver technique again. This is not bad. This works almost every single time. But what's really nice if you have your buddy hold down this as it's making the curve. You can see it's almost starting to bottom out. And there's one more trick. You can go and hit it from there. Another trick we used to use is take a piece of used Hyfax and made it up to the back of that, and you can then tap it in with that cut over Hyfax. As you can see, this thing is going home. It's getting there. What else is nice, since it does have these wear marks that were on the last one, it will ultimately line up again with the other wear marks, and you'll know this thing is home if you're looking at it from the side without being able to see the front as I'm watching along the way. So it looks like it's got about 2 more to go, and it'll be there. See, it's kind of giving us a hint along the way. I'm going to gently tapping it in, and you can see 1 more to go. It's going to get on there. It's going to line up with that silver. Still coming, still coming, and 1 more little love tap, and she's home. She's there. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, so we got them both driven home, slid in there. You get hardly any damage on the back of these when you ever use them out. It's not a big deal whatsoever. Looks like I can see from here, you might need 1 little small love tap. Only that I can see where it was hooked up to the silver before. And you've got to get this pretty close up front, because that bolt that's up front will tap any which way that you push it. So make sure you have it good and straight. That's that T27 bolt. And you can see when it's all the way in. I'm going to show you the window. It goes into the window. You can see that it's all the way up in there. And that, as you can see, it was tapered on top. It will, in its own way, find its own home. You want to put it in straight. You don't want that thing tapping in there sideways. Again, now that we have the track all loose, we can get some of this ice out of here, check all these bogey wheels. I mentioned about how to check those before. We're going to go ahead as well and tighten up. These inner ones are getting loose. They got loose on my machine on this last go around. I mentioned that about the bearing. So we're gonna go ahead and tighten that up. And then we're gonna go ahead and adjust this track up and get our track then after we get it adjusted, go ahead and make sure that it is tuned and straight. All right, we got the slides on. And while we're back here, and you can do this when you are or are not doing your slides, it's a great time to do a quick inspection of your track. And what you're looking for is any broken lugs, any issues, any broken or bent studs along the way. And it's great having Mike here for this, because then I don't have to rotate this myself. And you're slowly moving this, you're checking everything. Oh, one good idea is to put a little paint mark or a little notation of a unique feature, so you don't rotate this thing 6 times and not realize you're looking at the same studs. So Mike's gonna find himself a feature to look at.
Yep.
And we're gonna go ahead and rotate this thing around. Maybe, hopefully not, maybe we'll find an issue to show you.
Some ice in there.
Yep, we can go back the other way if we need to. Nothing noteworthy yet. And you get the point, you keep rotating around. Check every bit. I actually had a broken backer on my sled here at 2,500 miles that I'm gonna go ahead and fix up. But Mike's is looking in great shape. Now you're gonna get a little bit of wear on the inside edge. You can see some of the string or the fray coming through. Don't worry about that. You're gonna get some of that also on the outside. That's quite normal, but this track is looking like it's in great shape. Next part is to get this track adjusted and aligned, and it's doing the exact same thing, but you're gonna do slightly different things. So adjusted, you're gonna tighten this center bolt here, and that's your jam nut on that. And after we get this moderately adjusted, then we'll go ahead and align it, which is just a small tweak from there. Ultimately, it says measure 16 inches from this rear wheel. Well, is that the front of the wheel? Is that, where exactly is that? Candidly, where we think a good spot is, if you look at this Polaris sign here, you have this first bogey wheel that's in the center, really just off that by about an inch. Right where this is going to do you a pretty good job of where to take the measurement. You're going to go ahead and measure this up. It says between 7/8 and 1 1/8 inch at 10 pounds. Now these tools, are kind of common out there. It's a tension track tool. And what you do is you set this bottom portion for where you want that. And I'm going to actually set it up at about 2 centimeters, which you can see isn't quite 7/8. We're going to put it on pretty tight. We know that this high fax is going to burn in a little bit. And we also know that we'll have just a small bit of alignment to do. So what we do is we'll tighten up both sides of 7/8. We'll take out of one of the sides, then to get our ultimate adjustment. So once you have this portion done, you stick your O-ring on the bottom part, and then you stick your O-ring on the top part. You can see it's at 10 pounds. All right, we're gonna turn our adjustment nut and get this fairly close. We'll be able to tell by hand. Then we're gonna take this device, we're gonna push it in, and while measuring the top weight, we'll stare with our eyeball at the bottom to make sure that that distance is correct. So it is nice. You can do this on your own, of course. It's nice to have your buddy. He's pushing down to 10. He's going to hold that at steady at 10 and see where he's at. You need less or more?
There you go again. It's pretty darn close.
A little more. You're feeling right.
Tighten a little more.
I'll tighten just a.
Let me see. Man, I don't know if I touch it.
Okay, let's go to the other side. The exact same spot.
You could just film it. I'll make the
You're
adjustment. Good. That one needs loosened a bit.
Loosened a bit. Close?
Yeah, that's good there.
Okay. So now from here, we're just going to tighten up the jam nuts just a little bit. And then we need to go ahead and run the track 5 revolutions and check to see the alignment. We're going to go ahead and do that. We're actually going to go ahead and put the hood on, start the machine back up, run the track 5 revolutions, and take a look at our alignment. Okay, we started it up. We've rotated ourselves 5 revolutions or so, probably a little bit more on the track. And there's 2 places you can measure this. Polaris suggests you take a look in through these back windows, and that's true. You can see that you can say, okay, well that's about centered, and that's about centered. It depends on where your eye is or where your camera is. But another place you can measure it is off the side of these new slides. How far over is the track? And I like to use just a tape, and you can see exactly where that is. You can measure both sides and get this thing dialed in. Mike's gonna have a look at it real quick, and he's catching this side there, as long as you catch exact same part that you're measuring on either side. And I can already see there's a little bit of gap here on this. You can see with your eyes there's a slightly larger gap on this side. So we're gonna need to go ahead and slide this slide. This slide needs to go away from us in that direction. And that should happen by tightening this and loosening this side. Sometimes Mike and I have confused ourselves with this, and we did have that at 7/8, so we're actually just gonna loosen this side and see if I can get the slide over. Take a little bit of experimentation. You can freak yourself out in your head on which way to go with it, but ultimately make an adjustment, a couple of turns, and have a look. Start it up, have a look at what you got. If you didn't achieve what you were looking for, then go ahead and do a do-over. Now we're gonna keep doing that until we get this thing matched up, and then we're gonna go back again and recheck to make sure we got the tension right after we've got the track aligned. So now after doing it, and really it took about, I don't know, we do things in kind of 6 turns. It took about 3 1/6 turns, and you can come here and look, you know, it's almost spot on 2.5 inches. And over here, you know, it's gonna be, you know, same thing. I'm spot on 2.5 inches. You know, we're good to go. Now from here, we need to go ahead and retighten this, tighten the axle up, make sure we torque that. That's 35 foot-pounds on that axle. We'll then go ahead and make sure that we have our adjuster snugged up. And I said one more time, we're gonna go ahead and measure to make sure that we're within our specs of 7/8 inch to 1 1/8 inch on that track tension. Okay guys, tools for doing your slides. You know, 10 millimeter works good enough on the adjustment nut on the axle. I don't know if it's 5/8 or if it's 15 millimeter. I've used both throughout the years on the rear axle. A couple of drives to handle that. It is 35 foot-pounds when you retorque it. 5/8 wrench for the jam nut. A hammer works good for these slides. A screwdriver that you don't like. A mallet for putting these back on. A T27 up front to take out that nut. A 1/4 inch drive or whatever you have to hook to your T27. And a couple of, you know, other odds and ends if you need maybe a 10 millimeter. That'll help you for the adjustment nut in the back. And I think that that's it, except for one special tool, which is your track tensioning tool here. Last thing to do while you're taking care of your skid side is to hit your grease zerks. And you have a grease zerk there to hit. You have one down here on this axle as well. And the elusive third one, we'll see if we can actually find it today. We know those two for sure.
Now we're coming into the last section of this maintenance video. And there's a couple of easy things to do underneath the front hood. Obviously, the spark plugs, and then something that's not really difficult, but people make a big deal out of is a compression test. We're going to go ahead and do a compression test on this motor, and then finally, we're going to hold off on this video on doing a power valve maintenance. There are a lot of thoughts on the power valves. One is that you keep running them. And you don't have to clean them ever. Here I have a couple of pictures of 1,000 mile. Have a look at those power valves, and then again at 2,600 miles. And for me, I went ahead and cleaned my power valves. Mike elected to not clean his. So I guess that in a sense we're doing the power valve challenge to see if we don't clean his this next ride, what will happen if we have any issues whatsoever. And like I said, we're going to do a full video on just doing power valves here in the future. But I do mention in this portion, if you want to go ahead and yank them out and clean them up, how to do that. All right, guys, thanks.
Okay. All right, well, I was trying to talk Mike into doing his power valves this time. He says he's running, he's not going to do it. But what I will say is that you have these 4, 1, 2, 3, and there's one over there, 4 Allen head bolts. And I've seen some videos that say you need to take out the steering bracket up here, but on this VR1, you don't. It would appear that when you pull this out, that it won't clear this. But if you reach in with your hands and you compress the power valve, you can get this out of there, pull this whole mechanism out, flop it over to this side, put a garbage bag in here, and clean those power valves. I just did. I'll post as part of the video, a picture of what those valves look like. And while we're in here, there's 2 things we do want to do. We're going to go ahead and change the spark plugs. Make sure we got them good to go. And we have a couple spark plugs to put in. And then we're going to do a compression test while we're at it, so we have a baseline for this machine. Tools for this are kind of nice and easy. They're sitting here all on the way. You've got this nice little handy dandy wrench. Huh, what else could you use that star for? I think that maybe fits. Just curiosity. Oh, I guess it fits some of these body pieces. It doesn't fit the bars. Those are hexes. So there is a use to the other end of this tool, in case you ever wondered. It just dawned on me now to actually check 1 or 2 places. What's great about this tool is that you can't put too much torque on because it should theoretically slip through this. It's kind of a difficult place to work in there anyhow, but it's good just to use this tool, I think, and you never mess up along the way.
Oh, you're dirty.
Unsnapping these, you can go ahead and roll with it. Unsnapping these wires off the plug can be a little bit problematic. You gotta get, I'm not gonna say aggressive, but I would say creative with them from time to time. And then getting them back on, you have to be a little bit deliberate and give them a good solid push. We're gonna pull these out and do a little comparison. I have mine as well, see how this machine's running. So here are Joe's sled, 1,500 miles roughly speaking on them. This one here that I have in my hand is the first 1,000-mile one for you, Mike, or is this the one you just pulled? So this is 1,600 miles as well. So comparing them side by side, Mike's on the left, mine's on the right. There's not a noticeable difference. So I guess we're in good shape. Everything looks good so far. We'll swap these out and get moving forward. Gonna do a compression test here to get a baseline of 2,600 and X miles. And in order to do it, you have to put these 2 adapters together. On the other side of this, you have the gauge. One would be tempted to just screw these together first and then run it in there, but the problem is then you'll be at a bad angle for going into your spark plug. So what I like to do is to take the small adapter, feed this in by hand, being very, very, very gentle. And you really need to take it up just a little bit beyond hand tight. And then doing it this way, and then screwing this now into the adapter, if we have any damage to the threads or being at an angle, it's gonna happen on this compression tester hose and not on the head. So here now I got the hose in. I'm gonna go ahead and take this gauge and we're gonna hook it up. Mike's actually gonna do that. And the other interesting thing I do is that you don't need to put it in tight, but just to avoid, you're gonna be going wide open throttle. To avoid a little bit of a mess, just put one of the spark plugs or the one that still has an empty hole, just kind of screw it in by hand at least, keep some of the mess from coming out of the cylinder. It shouldn't do anything, right? I mean, each of these cylinders compress independently. It's gonna be nice to have Mike here. Actually, we'll go ahead and grab your hood so we can use your electric start. Although I don't know, I've never tried this before. I want to try the electric start without, see if you turn the key, see if it actually works without the hood. We've never done this before. I guess you don't need the hood. Okay, here we are checking now without hitting the throttle at all. And this is on the PTO side. Go ahead and crank it over quite a few times. And you can see it's right about where mine was, just shy of 140. Now you're gonna do it holding the throttle wide open. Go ahead. And he's right there on the button, about 150 something. So that's our PTO compression test, looking good. All right, now we're screwed in here now to the exhaust side. And this is gonna be without holding the throttle. Go. Yeah, right about where we expect it, call it 130, almost 140, 135, somewhere in there. And we're gonna go wide open throttle, see if we get that above 150 again. And it's good. I mean, you wanna make sure that you have good compression. It's holding at that 150, maybe slightly more. But what else is good to note is that we are equal pressure on both sides, and I have to call that a successful compression test, 2,600 and some miles, and we are about ready to go. The only other thing we're gonna do, while we're buttoning it back up, top off the oil, maybe give her a good wash, and we'll be out the door.
Well, once again, guys, I really want to say thank you. Thank you for those who watched through this video. Our hopes are that, obviously you used the video, you picked up some tips and tricks along the way. We're not mechanics, we're not professionals. We're just a couple of guys who wrench on our sleds and try to cover high mileage. And ultimately, years ago, we wished that there was somebody who would have showed us the path, or there was a video like this that we could have watched to learn from. So, really, if there's something we didn't answer inside the video, if something seems weird, please put a question into the comments, and we will get back with you. And other than that, I really appreciate it, guys. I appreciate you guys watching all of our videos. We hope to see you out there on the trail. Take care.